The screen's blue glow carved shadows across Zoe's face, a lone lighthouse in the sea of her darkened apartment. It was 2 a.m., the hour when ghosts of failed dreams whispered loudest, and she scrolled mindlessly through her feed, her thumb, a mechanical heartbeat against the glass. The world outside her window was a muted symphony of distant traffic and rain, pattering like forgotten regrets on the fire escape. Then it appeared, a shaky video time-stamped just hours ago, a toddler stumbling into bustling traffic horns blaring like alarms in a nightmare. From the blur of alley shadows emerged a German shepherd, sleek and spectral, lunging with predatory grace to shove the child back to safety. The dog paused, its eyes, deep ancient pools, flickering toward the camera before it vanished into the urban fog, leaving only the echo of its paws on wet pavement. Zoe's breath caught her mind racing. "Who are you? Why do you run?" For the first time in months, something stirred in her chest, a fragile spark piercing the numbness that had settled like dust over her shattered vlogging ambitions. The city sprawled beyond Zoe's rain-streaked window like a living beast, its veins of asphalt pulsing under neon veins that bled red and blue into the night. Skyscrapers loomed as indifferent sentinels, their glass eyes reflecting the chaos below, cars slicing through puddles, umbrellas blooming like black flowers against the downpour. Inside her apartment was a cocoon of isolation, cluttered counters strewn with cold coffee mugs, the air thick with the stale scent of takeout boxes and unwashed linens, a mirror to her unraveling soul. Rewinding the video, Zoe zoomed in on the dog Echo, though she didn't know the name yet, his coat matted with urban grime, a faint scar tracing his flank like a lightning bolt etched in fur. The child's cries echoed tinny from her speakers, but it was the dog's vanishing act that chilled her. One frame, present the next. A ghost swallowed by shadows that seemed to reach out hungry. Comments flooded in below the post. Seen him before, myth or mutt. Hints of a deeper enigma, whispers of sightings in old news clips, as if the city itself harbored a secret guardian, watching, waiting. Zoe's pulse quickened, the rain's rhythm, now a ominous drumbeat. What if he's not just a stray? What if something's chasing him? The screen flickered, casting elongated shadows across her walls, turning her sanctuary into a cage of unspoken threats. Zoe's fingers trembled as they hovered over the replay button, the video looping like a mantra in her fractured mind. The apartment's silence pressed in heavy as a shroud, broken only by the distant drip of a leaky faucet, echoing her unraveling thoughts. Why does he vanish? She wondered, her internal monologue a whirlpool of unspoken aches, her vlogging channel, once a beacon of creativity, now a graveyard of mocking comments that had stripped her bare, leaving her to hide behind screens and shadows. She hadn't left the apartment in days, her reflection in the darkened window a ghost of the girl who dreamed of viral fame, now reduced to numb, scrolling her heart, a locked chest where ambition had withered into regret. The dog's eyes in the video seemed to pierce through, judging her stasis, stirring a quiet panic. Am I disappearing too? She slumped against the couch, the fabric worn like her resolve. Breath shallow, as if the city's relentless pulse outside threatened to swallow her whole. No tears came, only a paralyzed hush, her body curling inward, defenses crumbling in the glow of that single haunting clip. Lila and Theo's unanswered messages blinked on her phone, invitations to the world she no longer trusted, but tonight the dog's silent heroism cracked the ice, forcing her to confront the void. If he can save someone, why can't I save myself? The room spun subtly, her grip on the phone tightening, a lifeline to something, anything beyond this self-imposed exile. Zoe's post about the video went live with a hasty caption, "Who is this hero dog vanished after saving a kid? Help find him." Her words a tentative bridge to the unknown. Comments trickled in like raindrops, most mundane, but one stood out from her Mason truth seeker, an account with a faded profile pic of a man in a trench coat reading, "That's Echo. Saved my life once. Same scars. DM if serious." Her heart stuttered, the name Echo resonating like a distant thunderclap, hinting at layers buried beneath the viral surface. She stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a watchful eye, her mind flashing to the dog's vanishing form. Echo like a sound that lingers long after it's gone, A chill traced her spine as if the apartment's shadows deepened, whispering of connections spanning time. Mason's message felt like a door creaking open, promising revelations that could shatter her isolation or drag her deeper into mystery. She hesitated, finger poised the rain outside, intensifying a veil between her and the world where Echo roamed unseen but ever present. Flashbacks flickered in Zoe's mind like old film reels, grainy and laced with the sharp tang of regret. 2 years ago, she had been a whirlwind of energy, camera in hand, chasing stories through sunlit parks and bustling markets, her vlogs bursting with laughter and unfiltered truth videos on hidden gems in the city, interviews with street artists, dreams of turning her passion into a lifeline. This is it. She thought then, her voice bright in the recordings, eyes sparkling under the glow of ring lights, surrounded by a growing audience that felt like family. But one misstep, a video exposing a local scandal that backfired when facts twisted under scrutiny, unleashed a torrent of online venom trolls dissecting her every word, accusations of fabrication echoing like accusations in a courtroom of shadows. Her subscriber count plummeted. Sponsors vanished like smoke, leaving her isolated in the ruins of her ambition. The apartment, once a creative hub, now a fortress of silence. The betrayal stung deepest. Those she trusted online turned first their comments knives, carving into her confidence, forcing her to question every frame, every smile. Now, as she stared at Echo's viral rescue, the dog's selfless dash mirrored her lost vitality, a guardian who acted without fear of judgment, while she hid her heart, a barren field where hope had once bloomed. If only I could vanish like him, she mused, the internal ache swelling a quiet descent into self-doubt that made the present feel like an endless echo of that fateful upload. Zoe's days blurred into a monotonous haze, each one a ritual etched in numbness, the apartment's dim light filtering through half-drawn blinds like reluctant confessions. Mornings began with the mechanical grind of her coffee maker, the bitter brew steaming untouched as she slumped at her desk, scrolling through feeds that mocked her inactivity, others thriving in the spotlight she once craved. Another day, another nothing. Her thoughts droned a protective wall against the raw edges of failure, her fingers tracing absent patterns on the mousepad, avoiding the blank script documents that stared back accusingly. Afternoons dissolved into reruns on a cracked screen, the laugh track's hollow echoes in the empty space, punctuated by glances at her phone where Lila's texts, "Hey, coffee soon," piled up, unread, her hesitation a shield against vulnerability. Evenings brought the ritual of half-hearted meals, microwaved remnants eaten, standing the kitchen's fluorescent hum, a companion to her solitude, the walls closing in like judgmental eyes. The clutter scattered notebooks of abandoned ideas, tangled charger cords, mirrored her inner void, a frozen landscape where emotions lay dormant, buried under layers of deflection. Yet tonight, with Echo's video looping, a subtle crack formed. Her thumb hovered over the group chat icon, inviting Lila and Theo the act, a whisper of rebellion against her paralysis, hinting that beneath the rituals, a spark lingered waiting to ignite. In the shadowed recesses of memory, Echo's past unfurled like a tattered scroll, fragments pieced together from the ether of forgotten labs and whispered betrayals. He had been born not in the warmth of a litter, but under the harsh fluorescence of sterile white rooms where the air reeked of antiseptic and the metallic tang of fear. Scientists in crisp coats had named him Subject E7, their voices clinical as they injected serums that burned like liquid fire through his veins, promising eternity in exchange for his soul. His body, once a canvas of sleek black and tan fur, now bore the scars of their ambition, needle tracks like constellations of betrayal along his flanks, a jagged line across his shoulder where restraints had cut too deep during convulsions that racked him for days. "Why me?" His silent gaze seemed to plead in those early days, eyes wide with the primal terror of a creature turned experiment, his heart pounding against ribs that felt forever altered cells, regenerating, unnaturally stretching time into an endless cage. In the shadowed recesses of memory, Echo's past unfurled like a tattered scroll, fragments pieced together from the ether of forgotten labs and whispered betrayals. He had been born not in the warmth of a litter, but under the harsh fluorescence of sterile white rooms where the air reeked of antiseptic and the metallic tang of fear. Scientists in crisp coats had named him Subject E7, their voices clinical as they injected serums that burned like liquid fire through his veins, promising eternity in exchange for his soul. His body, once a canvas of sleek black and tan fur, now bore the scars of their ambition needle tracks, like constellations of betrayal along his flanks, a jagged line across his shoulder, where restraints had cut too deep during convulsions that racked him for days. Why me? His silent gaze seemed to plead in those early days, eyes wide with the primal terror of a creature turned experiment. His heart pounding against ribs that felt forever altered cells, regenerating unnaturally stretching time into an endless cage. The rain-slicked alley behind the old diner reeked of greasy exhaust and damp concrete, a narrow vein in the city's underbelly, where shadows clung like forgotten sins. Zoe huddled under her hood, heart hammering as Lila and Theo flanked her, their breaths misting in the chill night air, Lila's fingers twitching over her phone's flashlight, Theo's eyes scanning the gloom with historian skepticism. Mason emerged from the fog like a relic from a noir film, his trench coat frayed at the edges, face etched with lines of discreditation, and unspoken burdens clutching a crumpled photo that matched the viral dog. "You came," he muttered, voice gravelly, over the distant wail of sirens, his eyes darting as if expecting phantoms. Then a rustle subtle as a whisper drew their gazes to the alley's end. Echo materialized from the murk, his form ghost-like under a flickering street lamp, scarred flank heaving with cautious breaths, eyes glowing amber in the downpour. The group froze, the urgency electric. Zoe's pulse thundered like the traffic overhead, the dog's brief stare a jolt that pierced their collective brokenness, her obsession. Lila's anxiety flickering like her light, Theo's grief-heavy shoulders tensing, Mason's hand trembling on the photo. Echo's presence was a living storm, his wet fur steaming the air thick with the scent of wet earth and unspoken peril, as if his very appearance summoned the weight of decades binding them in a web of fate and fragility. Mason's jaw tightened, the photo crumpling further in his fist as Echo's silhouette lingered at the alley's edge, a spectral guardian testing the air with flared nostrils. Not again. His mind raced, a torrent of doubt clashing like waves against a crumbling pier. Logic screaming that chasing ghosts had already cost him his career, his credibility shredded by that one botched story years ago, the fire where Echo had pulled him from flames only to vanish, leaving him labeled a fabulist. Zoe's eager eyes bored into him, her voice a hushed plea. "He's real, Mason. We need you," stirring the empathy he'd buried under layers of cynicism, a fear of caring that mirrored his survivor's guilt, the what-ifs that haunted his sleepless nights. Lila shifted uneasily, her anxiety a palpable hum, while Theo crossed his arms, his grief over his lost family making him wary of false hopes. Mason's internal war raged. Walk away, it's madness, versus the pull of Echo's gaze, those ancient eyes holding a subtle sign, a faint tilt of the head, as if recognizing him from that inferno long ago. The rain drummed relentlessly, amplifying the tension each drop, a reminder of time slipping away, until that glimmer of compassion cracked his resolve, shifting his mindset from armored retreat to tentative alliance. The alley's tension snapped like a frayed wire as Mason nodded, his voice cutting through the rain's murmur, "Follow me, but no promises," propelling the group into motion, their footsteps splashing echoes off graffiti-scarred walls. Zoe's heart raced, a wild drumbeat syncing with the city's nocturnal pulse as they piled into Mason's battered sedan, the interior reeking of old cigarettes and faded ink from yellowed clippings. This is it. She thought, her internal monologue a whirlwind of exhilaration and terror, the impulsiveness of the decision clinging like the damp on her skin, messy, irreversible, a leap from the precipice of her numbness. Lila clutched her laptop fingers, flying to map an old archive downtown, while Theo muttered doubts under his breath, his grief-shadowed eyes flicking to the rear view where Echo's form had dissolved into mist. Mason thrust the shaky photo forward, a grainy snapshot from a decade-old fire scene. Echo's form, identical scars and all unchanged by time's cruel hand. The car lurched through slick streets, neon blurs streaking like comets across the windshield, the act of pursuit binding them in a chaotic packed trust, budding amid the uncertainty, a shift from solitary shadows to shared resolve. Echo's trail felt alive, pulling them deeper into the night, the engine's growl a metaphor for their awakening commitment, imperfect but pulsing with raw potential. The archive loomed like a forgotten tomb, its iron gates creaking under Mason's lockpick, the air inside thick with dust motes dancing in flashlight beams like spectral confetti. Zoe's breath hitched as they rifled through brittle files, her fingers trembling on yellowed pages, until one surfaced, a faded lab record stamped Project Echo, detailing injections and eternal vigils, the words blurring through her rising tears. He's not just a dog, he's a prisoner of time. Her mind whispered the revelation, a knife twisting in her chest, mirroring her own entrapment in regret. Lila gasped at diagrams of scarred flanks. Theo's historian hands steadying the paper, while Mason's face paled his past rescue, now scripted in cold ink. Zoe stepped forward, voice steady despite the quake within. I'll lead this. We find him, protect him. Her offer, a fragile olive branch, extending care into the void where Echo had been glimpsed. From afar, hidden in the archive's exterior shadows, Echo watched his posture shifting from rigid coils to a subtle softening, ears perking at their hushed vows, his cautious response a silent affirmation. The group clasped hands in a messy circle, the pact forming like dew on dawn grass, irreal, vulnerable, yet blooming with the first whispers of healing. A promise etched in the dim light that bound their wounds to his turning pursuit into mutual salvation. The night outside hummed with possibility, Echo lingering longer in the periphery, his presence a quiet oath echoing their own. The foggy park at dusk wrapped around them like a shroud of uncertainty, the mist curling through skeletal trees that whispered secrets to the wind. Zoe knelt slowly, her breath visible in the chill, extending a hand, palm up toward the shadows where Echo lurked his form. A silhouette etched against the dimming light, eyes gleaming like distant stars, wary of approach. Give him space. She reminded herself, her internal monologue a gentle tether against the urge to close the gap, respecting the invisible barrier born of his scarred past, the lab's cold chains still echoing in his rigid stance. Lila and Theo hung back their presence, a quiet chorus of support, while Mason watched with folded arms, his cynicism a mirror to Echo's guarded posture. Echo's growl rumbled low, a thunder from deep within his hackles, rising like frost on glass body language, a fortress of defense tale. Stiff ears pinned a deliberate distance maintained as he paced the periphery shadows, swallowing his steps. Neither initiated. Zoe withdrew her hand, settling on a damp bench, the wood creaking under her weight, her own guarded heart, reflecting his wounds from betrayal, making every outreach a risk. The air hung heavy with unspoken histories, the fog a metaphor for their mutual isolation. Echo retreating further into the haze, his wariness a silent plea for time, binding the group in patient vigil as night deepened its hold. Moonlight filtered through the park's canopy like fractured memories, casting silver veins across the grass, where Zoe placed a bowl of kibble, her movements deliberate as a prayer, the scent of meat wafting into the night. Echo observed from his shadowed alcove, his scarred body a map of unspoken wounds, needle marks like faded constellations. A limp echoing the lab's relentless trials, mirroring Zoe's internal scars, the digital lashes that had flayed her confidence raw. We're both hiding. Her thoughts murmured, a quiet recognition blooming as she backed away, giving him the space to approach on his terms, her heart aching with the shared vulnerability of beings betrayed by those they trusted. Lila's anxiety softened in the stillness, Theo's grief finding solace in the ritual, while Mason's eyes held a flicker of remembrance, the fire's heat still smoldering in his mind. Echo hesitated, his nose twitching at the offering eyes locked on Zoe's retreating form, the connection forging through silent presence. No words, just the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the city, their mirrored suffering a bridge across the divide. He inched forward, wary but drawn, taking a tentative bite, the crunch a subtle symphony in the quiet, his posture easing ever so slightly, as the group's unspoken empathy enveloped him like a warm fog beginning to melt the ice of isolation. The park's twilight deepened, leaves rustling like pages from a forgotten diary as Zoe's fingers brushed against a rusted dog tag half buried in the dew-kissed grass near the kibble bowl. The metal was cold, etched with faint letters E7, a relic that triggered a cascade of flashbacks pulling her into the vortex of her own shattered past. The glare of her computer screen during that fateful upload, the rush of initial likes turning to venomous comments that flooded like a digital storm, drowning her in isolation. Just like this tag, discarded and scarred, her internal monologue wove drawing parallels to Echo's hidden torment, the lab's sterile echoes resounding in her mind, as if she could hear the clink of chains and the whine of machines. Echo paused mid-step, his amber eyes locking onto the tag in her palm, no longer recoiling but freezing in place, his breath a visible puff in the cooling air, a subtle acceptance blooming like the first crack in winter ice. Mason's face tightened nearby, the tag evoking his own memory, the roar of flames Echo's form bursting through smoke to drag him free, a debt unpaid that now hummed in the silence. Lila's hand steadied on Zoe's shoulder, her anxiety easing in the shared hush, while Theo's gaze softened his family loss echoing in the artifact's abandonment. The gentle gesture of Zoe lifting the tag, holding it out without pressure, forged an emotional tether. Echo inched closer, his nose twitching, the connection building. In layers of unspoken understanding, scars, recognized pains, mirrored a pause that spoke volumes where words failed. The air thickened with sensory ghosts, the metallic tang of the tag, the earthy scent of damp soil binding their histories in a quiet symphony of recognition. The dog beginning to accept not just the object, but the kindred souls before him. Dawn's first light pierced the park's canopy like golden threads weaving through the mist, transforming the once chilly expanse into a sanctuary where shadows retreated like fading nightmares. Zoe extended her hand slowly, a morsel of kibble balanced on her palm, the grains warm from her skin, carrying the faint aroma of roasted meat that mingled with the fresh dew on grass blades. "Come on, boy." Her thoughts coaxed gently, a soft gesture born of patience, her heart fluttering with the vulnerability of offering without demand, mirroring her own tentative steps toward reclaiming joy after the online abyss. Echo hesitated at the edge of the clearing, his scarred flanks rising and falling in rhythmic caution, but then subtly like the unfurling of a long dormant bud. He approached, nose quivering, accepting the food directly from her hand, his rough tongue brushing her fingers in a touch electric with trust. The moment sparked the first signs of relaxation. Echo's tail gave a tentative wag, a metronome of easing tension, while Zoe's lips curved into a genuine smile, the sound of her soft chuckle breaking the silence, like sunlight shattering clouds. Lila joined in her laughter, a light trill that eased her knotted anxiety, tossing a frayed tennis ball that bounced erratically across the turf, inviting play without force. The park's afternoon sun dipped low, painting the grass in hues of amber and gold, a canvas where shadows stretched like lingering doubts. But in that golden hour, Echo's form emerged from the tree line with a purposeful grace that halted the group's breath. Zoe sat cross-legged on the blanket, her hands idle in her lap, the air scented with wild flowers and the faint musk of earth after rain, her internal monologue a hush of anticipation. Let him come, don't chase her heart, a fragile vessel swelling with the vulnerability of hope after so many rejections. Echo paused at the edge, his scarred ears flicking forward, eyes scanning the circle, Lila's gentle smile, Theo's steady gaze, Mason's nod of quiet acknowledgement, each a thread in the tapestry of patience they'd woven. Then without coax, Echo padded closer, his paws silent on the turf, body language shifting from coiled wariness to a tentative unwind, tail low, but wagging in subtle arcs, muscles relaxing like ice melting in spring thaw. He reached Zoe first, his head brushing her knee in a feather-light touch, a surrender that sent a shiver through her, her eyes, misting as memories of her own isolation flooded back, now met with this unexpected warmth. The dog leaned in his weight, a solid reassurance against her leg, a lick on her hand, tasting of salt and trust, his breath warm and rhythmic, signaling full emotional yield. The abandoned lab's corridors echoed with the group's muffled footsteps, dust particles dancing in flashlight beams like uneasy spirits, the air stale with the metallic tang of rust and forgotten chemicals that clung to the throat. Echo led the way now, his nose to the cracked concrete floor, But suddenly, he stiffened, hackles rising like a ridge of frost along his spine. A low growl rumbling from his chest, a primal warning that sliced through the fragile peace they'd built. Zoe's hand paused mid-reach for a file cabinet, her internal monologue spiking with unease. What's he sensing, mirroring the subtle tension coiling in her gut, the lab's shadows lengthening as if alive, foreshadowing a threat from the past. Lila's flashlight trembled, her anxiety resurfacing in widened eyes, while Theo scanned the dim corners, his historian's mind piecing together the room's history of experiments, and Mason's jaw set, recognizing the dog's alert posture from that fiery night long ago. The lab's dim glow from a flickering bulb cast elongated shadows that danced like accusing fingers across the walls, the air thickening with the musty scent of decay and hidden horrors, as a lab file, yellowed and brittle, slipped from Mason's grasp, hitting the floor with a thud that reverberated like a heartbeat in panic. Echo's growl escalated into a protective snarl, teeth bared in a flash of white against the gloom, his body positioning fiercely between the group and the doorway, where a faint silhouette of a familiar figure loomed, the scientist from Project Echo. His presence a trigger that ignited the dog's primal aggression, rooted in the trauma of endless needles and cages. Zoe's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a cry as Mason's face contorted, his internal monologue erupting in a storm. Not him, not now, flooded with flashbacks of the fire where Echo had saved him. Flames licking at his heels, the dog's jaws clamping on his collar in desperate salvation, only for Mason's subsequent story to be dismissed as delusion, costing him everything. "It was you." Mason's shouted voice cracking like thunder, pointing at the intruder, whose cold eyes gleamed with recognition, the abuser's return unearthing Echo's maternal-like instinct to shield his barks, echoing the violence of prods and restraints that had scarred his soul. The lab's tension shattered like fragile glass underfoot as the scientist lunged forward, his hand grasping for a concealed syringe glinting under the bulb's harsh light, the air electric with the acrid scent of adrenaline and rust, forcing a direct confrontation that pinned the group against crumbling shelves. Echo's recognition was instantaneous, his body launching in a blur of fur and fury, jaws snapping inches from the intruder's arm, a primal roar echoing the years of torment inflicted in this very room. Needles piercing lights blinding the abuser's voice, once commanding obedience, now met with defiant rage. Zoe's scream pierced the chaos, her body instinctively shielding Echo as Mason charged his fists, connecting in a messy grapple that toppled a stack of files papers fluttering like startled birds amid the scuffle. The lab's chaos settled like dust after a tempest, the air heavy with the acrid residue of sweat and scattered papers, the flickering bulb casting a pallid glow over the group's heaving forms as the scientist's footsteps faded into the corridor's void. Echo's growls tapered to a low whine, his body slumping against Zoe's leg. Fur matted with debris, his eyes haunted pools of amber seeking hers in a plea for reassurance. The dangers retreat, leaving a vacuum where regret bloomed like nightshade. Zoe knelt, her fingers threading through his coat, a quiet reaffirmation amid the silence, her internal monologue a whisper of resolve. We made it, but at what cost? Tears tracing paths down her dust-streaked face, mirroring Echo's subtle tremble, their bond a fragile thread, pulled taut but unbroken. The rural cabin nestled in a thicket of whispering pines, its wooden walls creaking like old bones under the weight of encroaching dusk, the air crisp with the scent of damp earth and resin. A deceptive haven where the group's fragile peace began to fray at the edges. Echo paced the perimeter, his paws padding softly on the leaf-strewn floorboards, ears swiveling at every rustle, the snap of a twig, the distant hoot of an owl. His body a taut bowstring of instinct alerting to perils unseen long before the others stirred. Zoe watched from the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass internal monologue churning like storm clouds. Something's out there watching us, her fingers gripping the sill as subtle signs accumulated, a branch swaying without wind footprints in the mud that vanished under scrutiny. Echo's low whine, a harbinger echoing her rising unease. The cabin's door splintered inward with a crack like breaking bones, the night erupting into chaos as the scientist team, masked figures clad in black eyes, cold as lab steel, stormed through their boots, thudding on the wooden floor like judgments falling. Echo's growl thundered into a ferocious bark, his body a shield of tensed muscle and bared fangs positioning between Zoe and the intruders, the air thick with the sharp scent of gun oil and fear sweat that mingled with the pine's resinous bite. The danger crystallized unavoidable, the lead figure demanding, hand over the subject, his voice a clinical blade slicing the tension while flashlights pierced the gloom like accusatory beams illuminating Echo's scars, remnants of their creation now a symbol of defiance. Zoe's back pressed against the wall, her internal monologue a frantic whirl. This can't end here, not after everything, as her hands clutched Echo's collar, feeling his heartbeat race in sync with hers, the threat manifesting in physical collapse. Lila crumpling to her knees in panic, Theo grabbing a fire poker in desperate grip, Mason's face twisting in recognition of the abuser's underlings. The cabin's air hung still laced with the faint acrid whisper of smoke from the doused fire as moonlight filtered through cracked windows, casting pale ribbons across the splintered floor where shadows lingered like exhaled breaths. Zoe sat against the wall, her body a weary silhouette, movements minimal. A slow blink, a gentle shift as she drew shallow breaths, the rise and fall syncing with the distant hoot of an owl outside a soft punctuation in the night's hush. Echo lay nearby, his flank, rising steadily scratches from the fray marring his fur like faint constellations, his eyes half-lidded in exhaustion, the tension of battle ebbing away in incremental waves, each exhale a release into the peaceful void. Lila leaned on a chair, her fingers tracing idle circles on the armrest. No words passing her lips, just the subtle nod of acknowledgement to Theo across the room, his shoulders slumping as he stared at the ceiling, grief and relief mingling in unspoken pauses. Dawn's light seeped into the cabin like honey through cracks in the wood, warming the air with the earthy scent of pine and faint dew as Echo rose slowly, his paws padding across the floor in a steady rhythm that mirrored Zoe's awakening. Stretched their movements interwoven like threads in a loom of quiet recovery. She glanced at him, eyes meeting in a shared gaze, amber depths reflecting her hazel resolve, a silent exchange rich with sensory layers, the soft brush of fur against her leg as he followed her to the makeshift kitchen, the warmth of his breath mingling with the steam from a shared bowl of water behaviors, sinking over time like a gentle tide. The dawn-lit path unfurled like a ribbon of promise through the mist-shrouded woods, the air crisp with the scent of pine and fresh earth, each step a deliberate communion between Zoe and Echo, their movements syncing in intimate harmony, her bootfall soft, his paws padding in rhythm, breaths mingling like shared secrets. Echo glanced up, his amber eyes locking with hers in a profound gaze, the motion of his head resting briefly against her thigh, a single unexpected act that shattered the last veil of fear, symbolizing total trust, a quiet breakthrough where vulnerability met acceptance. Echo, she whispered the name rolling off her tongue like an invocation, and for the first time he responded, ears perking, tail wagging in subtle arcs, a response that unleashed an emotional torrent within her, tears blurring the path as regret and hope collided in cathartic release.